Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We are so grateful that you've joined us. My name is Mike McGuire, and I want to say thank you for allowing me to work with you as state senator representing Northern California and the North Coast. We want to welcome you to our great Redwood Trail Town Hall. We are so appreciative that you have joined us tonight. Hope that you had a wonderful Thanksgiving. Happy holidays, happy Hanukkah, Merry Christmas to each and every one of you. And I got to say, we are thrilled because we've just been told we have just over 2,500 folks joining us tonight, and we welcome each and every one of you. We are also welcoming the listeners of KMUD Radio in Southern Humboldt. Thank you so much to KMUD for broadcasting tonight's Town Hall Live. Let's jump right into tonight's meeting. I got to say, we have come a long way since the last time we were together on our last Great Redwood Trail Town Hall in February. This evening, we are going to be laser focused on the master plan for the Great Redwood Trail. But first and foremost, we want to start off with a quick recap on where we've been and how we got to where we're at here this evening. Now, for the last 3 decades, as you all know, the North Coast had a 320-mile long railroad corridor that is almost entirely in ruins from the Sonoma-Mendocino County line all the way up to Humboldt. Everything south of the Mendocino-Sonoma County line is owned and managed by the SMART train. The organization that was overseeing this railroad, the North Coast Railroad Agency, was mired in debt, lawsuits, and had completely failed in its mission to get freight rail started back on the North Coast. These train tracks were candidly a dead end to nowhere and nothing but a problem from the communities that they traversed through. And working with so many of you, we're able to turn this mess into a win-win for the entire North Coast by creating the Great Redwood Trail, which, when constructed, will become the longest rail trail in the United States of America. It will be a landmark hiking and biking trail that will run from San Francisco Bay to Humboldt Bay. The trail will traverse through and near some of the most spectacular landscapes on Earth, including ancient redwoods, state parks and national forests, golden oak-studded hills, lush vineyards, and of course, along the shores of the Russian and Eel rivers. Now, we got started on this project back in 2018 with the passage of our legislation, along with securing funds from the state budget to help pay off the long-term debt of the North Coast Railroad Agency. And that then began the transition of the North Coast Railroad Agency to a trail agency. Now, while it was a challenging task to unwind NCRA's financial mess, the concept of the Great Redwood Trail inspired so many people on the North Coast. And that is why we have persevered. And today we have outstanding news that will keep us moving forward for decades to come. This year, we were able to pass Senate Bill 69, which was the Great Redwood Trail Act. This piece of legislation, as of March 1st of 2022, will formally transition the focus of the governing board of the North Coast Railroad Agency from rails and freight to the management of the Great Redwood Trail. Let's talk about funding. There have been a lot of candid questions, rightfully so, about how the hell we're going to pay for this project. Well, we got good news to report tonight, and I'm thrilled to report that we now have funding to be able to move the Great Redwood Trail forward. Let's talk about the Budget Act that was passed this year, because it included 2 significant groundbreaking items for the Great Redwood Trail. Number 1, it appropriated the last bit of funding needed to pay off the remaining debt from the North Coast Railroad Agency. And it also added $10.5 million to pay for staffing up and for the master planning process of the Great Redwood Trail. The second piece that this budget paid for, it allocated $500 million. $500 million for projects that will help us fight our climate crisis and advance non-motorized trails of statewide significance, just like the Great Redwood Trail. Now, this is huge news, and it is a game changer. It answers the question, how the hell are you going to pay for the trail? Never before has so much funding been available for these types of projects and to be able to expand the Great Redwood Trail network. Let's talk about some other victories that we've seen over the last 12 months. Another big victory, Lone Pine Ranch. And some of you may have seen the acquisition of Lone Pine Ranch on the front page of your local newspaper. The budget bill that was passed by the legislature, signed by the governor this year, allocated $10 million that we were able to secure to help purchase the iconic Lone Pine Ranch in the Eel River Canyon. The ranch includes nearly 30,000 acres of wilderness and forest that runs along 18 miles of the Eel River. 12 miles of the 18 will become the Great Redwood Trail. We have partnered, and thank you so much to the Wildlands Conservancy, to open the land for public access. So in addition to the 12 miles of riverfront trail of the Great Redwood Trail, we'll be building out campgrounds, bathrooms, a non-motorized boat launch, and a series of trail networks that will crisscross the Lone Pine Ranch property. So now we have the organization to be able to replace the railroad with the trail and the money to be able to get it done. And this is just the start. We've also filed with the federal government to formally turn the railroad, the former railroad line from Willits all the way up to Humboldt Bay into a full-time trail. That's the Great Redwood Trail. So how are we going to get there? How are we going to build this out? First and foremost, several segments in cities throughout the North Coast and in counties are already being built, mostly in incorporated communities. But we have to master plan for the more rural or back country portions of the trail. And this is the critical next step to the Great Redwood Trail process, and that's the master plan. We need to have the master plan of the trail because it's going to guide us over the next few years of construction. The plan will involve each community that the trail runs through, and we're going to work intimately with adjoining landowners and the trail's neighbors. The master plan will help determine trail construction and alignment. It's going to focus on studying operational costs. What type of material will be used on each of the segments? A large portion of the trail will be like a backcountry trail, so it will mostly be gravel and dirt. It will provide us with a timeline for the build out of the Great Redwood Trail. It will focus on governance. It will focus on environmental, along with studying wildfire prevention and security measures. Of course, and I can't stress this enough, every step of the way during the master plan process, the community will be front and center. Neighbors will be front and center. And you're going to hear more how we're going to kick off the Great Redwood Trail Master Plan in early 22 in just a bit with the amazing Karen Gear from the Coastal Conservancy. Speaking of the Coastal Conservancy, they're going to be the new oversight body that will manage the Great Redwood Trail Master Plan and the governance here for the next few years. Once they take over formally, July 1st of 2022, they'll get the Great Redwood Trail Master Plan up, running, and executed. Finally, I want to say this, and I've said this to you before. We've always known creating the Great Redwood Trail was not going to be quick, and it wasn't going to be easy. My promise to you, we're not going to do it fast. We're going to do it right. There is a ton of work ahead over the next many years. It's going to take time to be able to do this trail right by the community. And we need to work through a slew of details with our partners in the federal and state governments and with all of you right here at home. But I got to tell you, thanks to each and every one of you, thanks to your support, we're off to one hell of a start. Millions of dollars are already being invested in building trail segments in communities along the corridor. And those communities are pushing for more resources to be able to build out more incorporated portions of the Great Redwood Trail. This evening, we're going to hear from some of the state's top trail experts who will give us a briefing on where we've been with the project, where we're at now, and where we're going with the trail. The most important part of tonight is hearing from each and every one of you. We welcome your live questions. If you'd like to email your questions in tonight, please do so right now. Email us, senator.mcguire@senate.ca.gov. Again, email us right now, senator.mcguire@senate.ca.gov. We look forward to hearing from you. If you're watching this on Facebook, simply drop your question, your comment into the chat, and we'll be getting to those as well. We've had several hundred questions that were submitted prior to the town hall. We're going to try to get to as many questions as possible. And again, we are so thankful that you're with us. All right, so let's get into our all-star panel. First and foremost, we're going to be hearing from Karen Geer. She is with the State Coastal Conservancy. And I got to tell you, Karen is a trusted ally here on the North Coast. She has worked on land and open space projects for many years up and down Northern California. Karen is going to be the point for the Coastal Conservancy on the Great Redwood Trail. She's going to be giving us a brief overview of who the heck is the Conservancy and what do they do. She's also going to be providing a briefing on the Conservancy's upcoming role, working with the Great Redwood Trail's Board of Directors, how the master plan is going to be rolling out, what the public engagement process is going to be like, and how they'll oversee initial build out of some potential Great Redwood Trail segments. Again, Karen, we welcome you. Thank you so much for joining with us. The floor is yours.
Okay, well, it's great to be here, Senator. I really appreciate you including us in this town hall. Just to start, who is the State Coastal Conservancy? We are a small state agency and a lot of people haven't heard of us. But we were created in the late 1970s to protect, restore, and enhance coastal resources and make sure there was public access to and along the coast. And how do we do that? We accomplish this mission by providing technical assistance and funding to public agencies, nonprofits, and tribes to plan and implement on-the-ground projects. Because of our experience in working collaboratively with communities, particularly on trail projects like the Bay Trail and the Coastal Trail, we've been asked to help advance the Great Redwood Trail by leading this master planning effort and to help the Great Redwood Trail Agency with its transition from being a rail agency to a trail agency. As Senator McGuire mentioned, with his help, the state budget this year included $10 million that came to the Conservancy to get working on this trail planning effort, and we'll be staffing up on that in 2022 to hit the ground running. In terms of what the master plan will cover, in a nutshell, I mean, I think Mike actually just gave a very good overview, but it's really supposed to provide the overall vision of what is this trail? What do people want it to be? What are the types of uses do people want on this trail? It's going to build off the trail assessment that was completed last year. Sorry, I just saw a comment that popped up on the screen that distracted me. It's going to build off the trail assessment that was completed last year, and we'll be bringing on trail planning consultants with the necessary technical expertise to come up with the trail design. As Mike mentioned, certainly the public and tribal outreach effort is a really key component of this. The assessment really assessed the corridor. It didn't have a chance to get out and hold public meetings and do that kind of groundwork. And we want to hear your ideas for the trail, what you want the trail to be, how you want it to be different in different parts of the alignment. And we also want to identify the issues of concern. I mean, we've heard some already. We know people are concerned about fire. We know people are concerned about security and impacts to adjacent landowners. And we want to get those out up front, as many of them as we can, and find the solutions to them. And there are a lot of trail systems throughout this country, and people have found solutions. So we're going to be tapping into the best practices we can to address those up front. We do expect the plan is going to be looking closely at the alignment. There are places we know are challenging, and there may be places where a reroute's necessary. And so we'll be looking at that and how a reroute would be accomplished. And we also will expect that the master plan will make recommendations in terms of the types of trail surfaces for different user types. So as Mike said, you know, a paved trail through the Eel River Canyon is probably not going to happen. It's super expensive. It's not really necessary, and that kind of, and it also could detract from the experience of a backcountry trail. Whereas the trails that are being built in the more urban areas, or as are already being built, are multi-use paved paths for bicycles and strollers and all kinds of we will also be looking at what are the types of amenities that are needed along the trail corridor. When you have a long section of backcountry trail, we are going to need to look for where people can overnight. And we are very fortunate that the Wildlands Conservancy has just completed the acquisition of Lone Pine Ranch, because it's great to have a willing participant right there in the middle of the canyon who's already ready to work with us on those kinds of amenities. But you also need to look at where people are going to jump on and off the trail, and what are the amenities and where are those spots going to be. What do we need to provide? Is it parking, or the restrooms, or what kinds of things that we need to do to make it an enjoyable trail experience? And finally, the master plan is going to obviously need to look at the trail management. I mean, it's a key concern there, when it's certainly more challenging in the backcountry than it is in the cities, where there's already trails underway and people are already excited, and we have local governments ready to step forward and manage those trails. So before any trail segment gets built, you have to identify who's going to manage it so that it's run properly, and that will be an important component of the master plan. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. We are super excited to be part of this. We think it's a great vision. We really thank the senator for all the work he's done on moving this forward. At the beginning, it did seem a little bit like a dream, and it's becoming much more of a reality with each passing day. And we really look forward on working with you, all of you who I can't see on this on this town hall, who want to participate in the planning effort and get your thoughts and ideas in, so that we can come up with a trail that we can all be proud of.
Thank you so much, Karen Gear with the State Coastal Conservancy. Karen will be taking the head on the Great Redwood Trail for the State Coastal Conservancy, who will be acting as the management firm, if you will, to oversee the master plan and the governance and some initial build out of the Great Redwood Trail. And I got to be candid, we couldn't do this without the State Coastal Conservancy. They're one of the most innovative, nimble organizations that we have in the state of California. And Karen is truly one of the best. So thank you so much, Karen, for joining us. We're going to be now hearing from Hank Seaman. Hank, of course, is the Assistant Public Works Director for the County of Humboldt. He's one of the most dedicated and determined trail builders on the North Coast. Before Hank gets into his portion of the program, and Hank is going to be talking about where are the most likely next segments going to be, and how is it all going to work, and what type of partnerships we're going to need to be able to build the Great Redwood Trail. I'd like to be able to break the Great Redwood Trail up into two segments, the southern segment and the northern segment. I'd like to start with the southern segment. The southern segment runs from San Francisco Bay up to the Sonoma-Mendocino County line near Cloverdale. That segment is solely owned and managed by SMART. SMART is Sonoma Marin Area Rail Transit Authority. They are a publicly funded passenger rail service that connects the communities in Marin and Sonoma County. Now, through the voter mandate, which created SMART, a trail will be built alongside the SMART rail. That trail will run from the San Francisco Bay alongside the SMART rail up to the Mendocino-Sonoma County line. That's where the northern segment starts. The northern segment for the Great Redwood Trail will be from the Mendocino-Sonoma County line all the way up to Humboldt Bay. That northern segment is where we're going to build on top of the rail. We're going to place the trail literally on top of the rail. The way we do that is we have to petition to the federal government to rail bank the rail bed. What that means is the federal government has to give us the authority to be able to take that rail bed out of service. And that is what we're going to be doing, since there hasn't been any freight service on that rail line since 1989, and it is in terrible shape. And we will never see freight service returning for the North Coast. That is why we're moving forward with the Great Redwood Trail. So again, in the southern segment, Marin County line to the Sonoma-Mendocino County line, the Great Redwood Trail will run along the SMART rail line. Everything north of the Sonoma-Mendocino County line up to Humboldt Bay will be trail on top of the former rail bed. There are several segments that are currently being built. There are segments being built in the city of Ukiah. In fact, the city of Ukiah has just received state funding to build out the remaining portion of their section of the Great Redwood Trail that will connect north with south in Ukiah. Willits just received a significant grant that will allow the city to be able to build the entire length of the community, north and south, with the Great Redwood Trail. The city of Hillsburg just built their newest addition to the Great Redwood Trail. And there are several segments being planned in Sonoma and Mendocino counties. Hank Seaman, the Assistant Public Works Director and really point for trails in Humboldt County, is going to primarily focus his talk tonight on the northern segment build out of the Great Redwood Trail. Mr. Seaman, we welcome you tonight. Thank you so much, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Senator. Good evening, everyone. So local agencies in Humboldt County have been working on trail projects within the rail corridor for the last several years that will become part of the Great Redwood Trail. And working in the railroad corridor is critical because to have a regional trail, you need a linear strip of land with minimal conflicts. And the railroad corridor that's no longer has a need for freight service is perfect for that purpose. And City of Eureka completed 6 miles of the Eureka Waterfront Trail. The City of Arcata completed 4 miles of the Humboldt Bay Trail North. And they're also starting a project along the Mad River. In Humboldt County, we've been working on a project to connect Eureka and Arcata. And this has been a regional priority to connect the 2 biggest cities in Humboldt. A really key point is that the purpose and design of a trail depends on the context. So it depends on the landscape, the nearby communities, and the adjacent land use. So for Eureka and Arcata, we have a need to use the trail for both transportation and recreation. It will be, for recreation, it provides coastal access, opportunities to really observe and appreciate nature around the bay. It becomes a vibrant place for people to recreate and improve their health. And it also becomes an opportunity to substitute for vehicle trips between the 2 cities. So it's really for that multiple purpose. That's why we have funding from both the California Transportation Commission and the Coastal Conservancy for both transportation and recreation. And it's going to be a paved trail. So it's 10-foot wide paved asphalt. So that adds to the cost, that adds to the overall design complexity and the time. And I should say that these projects have been designed for the trail to be parallel to the railroad. And that has also added cost as well as increased the environmental impacts. And so what with Senator McGuire's legislation and this effort to request that the federal government authorize use of the rail corridor for trail, that will be a huge game changer for planning future trail projects. It will reduce the cost, it will reduce the environmental impacts, it will increase the readiness to get these projects on the ground. So that's going to be a huge benefit going forward. So we're hoping to get our Coastal Commission permit for the Bay Trail in February and begin construction next year and then be complete in 2023. We're also about to start a planning project along the railroad corridor from south of Eureka to College of the Redwoods. And this is, there'll be similar elements for our study to what will be happening with the master plan for the Great Redwood Trail. We need to understand the existing conditions, where there's damage, where there's concerns about flooding and drainage, where there's sensitive environmental areas. What is the desired use of the community? How do they want to use the trail? Where do they want to go? And how do we link with destinations? So these are very similar questions that the master plan for the Great Redwood Trail will address at a larger scale. What are the logical segments? How do you phase it? Where are the access points? What's the desired use? And all that will dictate the design and the cost estimates. It's also really important to look at adjacent land use, what kind of design elements are needed, whether it's fencing, vegetation, lighting, and also just the overall vulnerability to either flooding or wildfire risk and how to develop strategies to address those issues. So it's really exciting to have these local projects working and then kind of feed into this bigger vision of the Great Redwood Trail. And, just thinking in terms of how I see the master plan being structured, I think it will quickly identify different sections and regions. So for example, I know in Mendocino County, there was a study by the Mendocino Council of Governments 10 years ago that looked at trail ideas along the railroad. And this was before Senator McGuire's legislation. So those concepts need to be updated, but they, looked at the Ukiah area. They looked at the central Willets to the intersection with Highway 162. And then they looked at a northern section within the canyon along Outlet Creek and the Eel River. So you need to identify different regions and then focus in on how you connect communities and where you get the most utility. And similarly for Humboldt, I think we'll distinguish a coastal region and an interior region. On the coast, we want to connect communities. So it'll be a priority to connect Fortuna and Lolita, ideally connect Eureka to College of the Redwoods and then College of the Redwoods to Lolita, connecting Fortuna to Rio Dell and Scotia. I think that'll be the coastal region. And those will likely be having both a transportation and a recreation function. And then from Rio Dell and Scotia South, that's where you get more of the inland, the interior region for Humboldt. And those are going to be more natural surface trails, more recreation trails. The cost for those will be much lower. And again, we'll need to identify the access points, the management strategy. So the master plan will be a way to organize and develop a strategy that identifies the most ready to go projects, where there's community partnerships, where's the most cost-effective way to invest in building out the trail as quickly as possible. So Senator, those are some ideas for, based on our local experience in Humboldt, how we think the rollout of the Great Redwood Trail and the master plan process will go.
Thank you so much. That's Hank Seaman. He is the Deputy Director of Public Works for the County of Humboldt. We're grateful. We have major progress in all counties that the trail will traverse through. We have major progress happening with more urban segments of the Great Redwood Trail in Humboldt, in 2 cities in Mendocino, throughout Sonoma and Marin counties. And we're grateful for the partnership of so many city and county leaders throughout the North Coast for working with us on the Great Redwood Trail. We're going to hear more from Hank in just a bit. We want to remind you, if you'd like to be able to ask questions tonight, we look forward to having the conversation. You can email us live, your comments, your questions, your concerns, your criticisms, senator.mcguire@senate.ca.gov, senator.mcguire@senate.ca.gov. We now have 2,600 folks watching. Thank you so much for tuning in tonight. The last item that we'd like to be able to cover are potential threats to the Great Redwood Trail. And we'd like to cover those potential threats before we get right into your questions. And we have a lot of questions coming in. Thank you so much. So I'd like to be able to cover the coal train. I'm sure many of you have heard that there is a shadowy, anonymous LLC, a secret corporation based out of Utah, Wyoming, and Montana, who wants to start up a coal train. Yes, a toxic coal train on the North Coast. That toxic coal train would take coal via rail from Utah, Wyoming, and Montana, put it on 800 railroad cars every day, run it out through the National Rail Network, through Nevada, all the way up the North Coast to the port of Humboldt. There will need to be about 800 rail cars filled with coal, rumbling 7 days a week, 365 days a year, running north to the port of Humboldt to ship coal out from California to Asia. Every day there would be a second train, 800 cars long, running south to be able to go back to Utah, Wyoming, and Montana to fill up with coal and start the process all over again. We know that this shadowy corporation is worth over $1 billion, and they have put in a competing application with the Great Redwood Trail to federal regulators to start a toxic coal train that will run through our communities. their application to start a toxic coal train will be up at approximately the same time when federal regulators review our bid to be able to rail bank the rail line from Willits all the way up to Humboldt Bay and turn the rail line into a trail. So they want to be able to ship coal from Utah, Wyoming, and Montana through the North Coast along the Russian and Eel rivers that supply drinking water to over 1 million people every year, establish a coal terminal at the port of Humboldt, and then ship coal over to Asia. Here's what I say to them. We are not going to let that happen. We're going to put a nail in the coffin of coal. We know that coal is the #1 contributor to our climate crisis here on planet Earth. And while big coal have billions of dollars to be able to try to get this through federal regulators, we're going to fight it. We're going to fight it like hell, and we're going to win. And we're going to win because we have Congressman Jared Huffman on our side, who is working hard to ensure that this coal train proposal fails at the Surface Transportation Board, which is the federal regulator that oversees all freight rail and rail bank rail lines, turning rails into trail. We also want to say thank you to nearly every city council member and member of the Board of Supervisors here on the North Coast. They have all submitted letters of opposition to the federal government, and we're working hard with local, statewide environmental organizations to be able to stop this dangerous proposal. And that's not all. We've also introduced legislation, Senate Bill 307, that will no longer allow any state funding to be invested to upgrade a rail line or a coal terminal at the port of Humboldt. No public funds could go into it. But look, we have our work cut out for us. They're worth big bucks, but I know that we got the people on our side and we're going to win. But that is a big threat to the Great Redwood Trail. And we assume that we're going to see some type of hearing on the toxic coal train and the Great Redwood Trail in front of federal regulators sometime in the first 6 months of 2022. That said, we're moving full steam ahead. And the state of California is squarely behind the Great Redwood Trail. And we're squarely behind it, not just because this is a key environmental project, because this is an economic driver. This is an economic driver for rural North Coast communities. California has a $55 billion outdoor recreational economy. Backpacking and hiking is among the top economic drivers in our outdoor recreational economy. And we know that it's going to help lift the communities that this trail runs through. We know that California's outdoor recreational economy is also one of the fastest growing economic sectors of the Golden State's economy. And what we also know is that this is going to bring additional tourism and lodging. It's going to increase property values. It's going to help with public sector expenditures. All of these go up when there is a robust trail network in or near communities. And we're going to hear more from Laura Cohen all about this, how trails don't just connect folks to nature, but they also are significant economic drivers for the communities that they run through and or are near. All right, so ladies and gentlemen, it is now time to be able to get to our all-star panel. And we're going to be hearing from Karen and Hank and Laura here right now. And let's get going here with Laura Cohen first. Laura, I'm going to have you take yourself off of mute. We welcome Laura to the town hall. Now, Ms. Cohen is the Western Regional Director for the Rails to Trails Conservancy. She has been an ally helping us since day one to be able to move the Great Redwood Trail forward. And I got to say, Laura and the Rails to Trails Conservancy, they have dedicated their life to transitioning former freight rail lines into trail. And in fact, across the nation, Laura, it's amazing to look at 25,000 miles of freight rail line across America in red states and blue states and every corner of this nation. 25,000 miles of freight rail line has now been transitioned to outdoor recreation and trails. There's a lot of folks that say the Great Redwood Trail won't and couldn't be built. First, they said we couldn't get the money. Now that we have the money, we're moving forward. But Laura, I want you to talk about this. We're not reinventing the wheel with the Great Redwood Trail. Talk to us how this has worked. And if you can also touch on trails are big economic drivers, especially for rural communities. Laura Cohen, welcome. And if you want to answer that first question.
Great. Yeah, thanks. Great to be with you, Senator McGuire. And we're so excited about the Great Redwood Trail at Rails to Trails. And as the senator said, this will be the longest in the country. So very exciting and so grateful for your leadership. It's great to have a trail champion like this on the North Coast. And I'm sure all of you joining tonight appreciate his leadership. As the senator said, we've been around as a national nonprofit organization since 1986, and we were formed at a time when many, many miles of railroad were being abandoned. And in the years that we've been working and compiling this data, 25,000 miles of rail trails already completed. That's almost 2,300 individual trail projects all over the country. There are also 875 current projects underway that will add about 9,200 additional miles of rail trails. So there's lots of success, great track record of getting this done, small ones, long ones, everything in between, urban, suburban, and rural. So and that's a lot of the role that Rails to Trails plays is we capture those case studies and lessons learned and share those. A big part of what we do is let's gather the best practices and share that widely, because we can really do this better if we all just support each other with the latest and best information and lessons learned from doing all these trails under a lot of different circumstances.
So Laura, let's talk about economics of trails. The vast majority of the Great Redwood Trail will be a backcountry trail through some incredible wilderness. And these trails really turn into economic drivers for rural communities. I'll be honest, when I started digging into this, I was just astounded about how trails really turn around rural communities. Talk about that and how that works and what you've seen throughout the country of these trails turn into economic drivers. How does that work?
Yeah, there's a lot of great work being done out there to kind of connect communities that are looking to revitalize, to maybe shift from industries that are in decline and look for a new identity for some rural communities. And as you mentioned, the outdoor recreation economy is huge. Bike touring is huge. Hiking is huge. Rail trails in particular are very family friendly. There's a program out there that is called Trail Towns, and it's actually a whole organization that helps support communities that want to create an identity for their town as a trail town, and all of the marketing and tourism and how to do that well, and all the examples of communities that have really taken on that identity as a trail destination and made that work. And it supports, as you can imagine, local bike shops and B&Bs and people stopping in your town and spending money and moving on to the next town, going from town to town. So there's a huge opportunity and a lot of great ideas and resources to learn from on that I think will be really a benefit to the North Coast as we move forward with the Great Redwood Trail.
Laura, I want to stick with you, and I'm going to bring in Karen in just a moment here. Let's talk about the issue of wildfires. Look, it's at the top of all of our minds. We're deeply concerned about wildfire here on the North Coast. Many of the communities have been devastated by some of the largest wildfires in American history right here at home. And we've been getting a lot of questions tonight about how are you going to focus on wildfire safety? I think it's important to note, if we take a look at the top 10 wildfires here in the state of California, the top 10 most devastating wildfires in state of California history, not one has been started by a trail user. They have been started by a utility. They have been started by lightning, by automobiles, but not one by a trail user. And we literally have thousands of miles of trails that dot the state of California. That said, one of the biggest focuses that we're going to have on this master plan is how can we make this trail fire safe, and advancing a wildfire safety plan, advancing vegetation management along the trail, limbing up trees, getting rid of flammable invasive species. But Laura, what have you seen across the nation? And then I want to turn it over to Karen, because Karen, I know that this is going to be a focus for the Coastal Conservancy in the master plan. But first, let's go to, of course, Laura Cohen here to be able to talk about wildfire safety.
Yeah, there's a lot of attention on the issue, as you mentioned, and because our state is very focused on developing strategies for prevention and management, it's getting serious attention that it deserves, and I think the planning process for the Great Redwood Trail will benefit from that. There's a couple of different ways to look at it. One is that the role of trails and green space in wildfire prevention. There's an excellent report out just this year from the Greenbelt Alliance called The Critical Role of Greenbelts in Wildfire Resilience, talking about how trails and greenbelts can play a role in reducing lives and property loss in wildfire events while increasing resilience. They can also provide service fire breaks and strategic locations for wildfire defense, and provide wildfire resistant green spaces, especially if you're looking at more natives and less invasive. So there's kind of that forward-looking strategy. We also have, sadly, some trails have been damaged in California fires before. We can learn a lot from those towns' experiences in rebuilding. For instance, there's some great information on our website and other websites on the trail manager from the city of Reading, for instance, had some trail damage from the 2018 Carr fire. And, his recommendations about, that fire worthiness should be a factor in decision-making regarding trail construction. Some of their trails had melted culverts, and so they're rethinking that, saying, well, maybe those can be converted into rock-armored low water crossings. So there's a lot of things that you can kind of think differently going forward, and I think this project can benefit from that.
No, thank you so much. That's Laura Cohen. She's the Western Regional Director for Rails to Trails Conservancy. Karen Gear with the Coastal Conservancy. Karen, I know that we have yet to launch the master plan, but Karen, this is something that the Coastal Conservancy funds. The Coastal Conservancy does a lot of things, including funding wildfire and vegetation management. So this is going to be a big focus of the master plan of how we can make these trails fire safe. Karen, I don't want to put words into your mouth, but I know this is going to be part of the master plan. Karen?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Laura just ran through a bunch of potential best practices that can be included in a plan. So I think we will be looking to Rails to Trails Conservancy and to other trail managers across the state as to finding the best solutions. Certainly vegetation management is something the Conservancy has funded really starting this year with some of the support from you, Senator McGuire, of early action fire vegetation management projects. So we do have experience in funding those kinds of projects, but we'll need the plan to really tell us what's best to use in which situations.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's going to be top of mind. And we're going to also want to be able to take input from landowners and neighbors of the trail on what you would like to be able to see. And again, here's the great thing about tonight. We have yet to kick off the master plan. It's going to be happening here in early 2022. The Coastal Conservancy is staffing up for this, and the money is there to be able to move this forward. I want to go to one more issue for Laura, and then I'd like to be able to turn it over to Karen, because I know this is something Karen's already started thinking about. We've received several questions about homelessness along the trail, and this is something that we have to think about. I'll be honest, a lot of this trail is going to be out in the backcountry. So just being candid about it, you don't, if you are going hiking on the coastal trail, for example, or if you're hiking in Desolation Wilderness, a lot of those sections are incredibly remote. The same thing here. Yes, there will be urban sections running through communities, but especially the northern route of the Great Redwood Trail, very remote. Laura, we have to focus on homelessness. I will say we had another town hall about homelessness, record funding for permanent supportive housing, mental health, and drug and alcohol addictions moving by the state. But Laura, this is something that I know the Conservancy has been taking a look at throughout the country. And Karen, I'm going to have her chime in because I know this is something that the Coastal Conservancy is going to be looking at as well. Laura, we'll go to you first on homelessness.
Yeah, well, you're absolutely right. And we just first need to acknowledge that the issues surrounding homelessness are complex. They touch many aspects of the community. And so mitigating homelessness and homelessness on, encampments on trails, you can't be looked at as the sole responsibility of a trail management agency or one city or one county. It really has to be across jurisdictions and across areas of responsibility, solving the housing crisis. And so that's a big issue. But there are some good resources of like the National Recreation and Parks Association has done a survey on how various parks agencies are addressing homelessness with some good recommendations and practices. Some of it is in enforcement and eyes on the trail, but there's also, design features that can help. The more remote areas, of course, a little more challenging because you don't have the same ability to police on a daily basis or as many maybe eyes on the trail as you do in the more inhabited areas. So, that's something that absolutely will be, part of the serious discussions in that master planning process.
Thank you so much, Laura Cohen, Rails to Trails Conservancy. Karen, part of the master plan is going to be looking at homelessness, but I think the other piece, Karen, there's going to be a robust trail stewardship program that will be established, right? There's going to be security protocols on the trail. But again, we're very early in on this. And again, I can't stress this enough. The Coastal Conservancy, I want to do this. We want to do this right, not fast. And I think one of the frustrations that people have is they want to get this thing done yesterday. But Karen, that's why we're moving forward the master plan, to be able to study how to be able to make this wildfire resilient, how to be able to focus on homelessness and security. But Karen, again, I don't want to put words in your mouth. Take it away.
Yeah, absolutely. We already know in some of the urban areas that Eureka has had challenges, and they've learned the process to go through to work on homelessness issues along the trails, and it's a hard subject. But I think there are examples of how it's being handled in the North Coast, and I think as we move forward on this planning process, I think that there will be. It's certainly one of the issues we've already identified that we know we need to address, and we know we need to come up with a list of best practices, and it is a community issue that needs many people working on it. So the trail in itself is not going to obviously fix homelessness. It's how we can manage to plan for a trail that's going to be welcoming to trail users, and what we can do to set ourselves up for success in the long run.
You are watching the Great Redwood Trail Town Hall, focusing on the master plan that will be kicking off in early 2022. You're joined tonight with Hank Seaman from the County of Humboldt, Karen Geer from the Coastal Conservancy, Laura Cohen from the Rails to Trails Conservancy. Let's get into some of the questions. Let's keep it going. All right, Karen. Karen is the point for the Coastal Conservancy. Like it or not, Karen. I'm kidding. We love working with Miss Geer, and this is so personal for her. Let's talk about dogs. We're getting a lot of questions. Will dogs be allowed on the trail? Karen, a little too early to tell, but you take it away.
Well, I can tell you that some of the trails that are already constructed do allow dogs. So we know that much. We know that people love hiking with their dogs, and we know that sometimes landowners are concerned about people walking with their dogs and not keeping them under control, especially in rural areas with cattle. So I think it's something we're going to look hard at, and I think that it will be accommodated to the best extent that we can, because I know I love walking with my dog, and I know many people do, but we also have to be sensitive to surrounding land uses. So I think we will be working through that in the master plan.
Absolutely. And we're going to stick with Karen Gear. Karen is point for the Coastal Conservancy and the Great Redwood Trail. We're now going to talk about interpretive displays, Karen. So Erica writes in, are there plans for interpretive displays along the way, particularly at rest stops to educate the public about the environments, plants, animals, geology, etc.? Karen, I'm sure this is going to be part of the plan. And that's one of the most unique parts of the Great Redwood Trail. You're going to be able to hike along two different mighty rivers. You're going to be able to walk through ancient redwoods near national forests, oaks at the Golden Hills. There's a lot of history with several Native American tribes and culture and heritage on this trail. I'm sure you're going to be looking at interpretive signage, correct?
Absolutely. I think that's part of, in particular, we're looking at the trailheads and what amenities would be at trailheads. We certainly want to have a lot of input from our local tribes as to information that they would like to put out to the world about the area the trail's passing through. And I think in most trailhead settings, you would see some sort of interpretive signing and also letting people know what the trail users are expected to do on the trail as well, what the rules are and how we can make it an enjoyable experience for everybody.
Karen just brought up the term facilities. And so let's talk about bathrooms. You can't talk trails without talking about bathrooms. Let's just be blunt about it. And so let's talk about how bathroom use would be ushered in. Again, this is truly one of the more important parts of a long-term trail system. So Karen, a lot of questions about overnights and bathroom use so that folks aren't using neighbors' land, et cetera. Give us an idea, and then I want to go to Laura. How do you plan for bathrooms, porta potties, et cetera, along the way? How does it work with the Coastal Trail, for example? And then Laura, you have the experience of transitioning thousands of miles of rails to trails. I want to hear about bathroom usage because I'm not kidding you. We probably have 36 questions about bathrooms here tonight. So Karen, let's talk about that for a moment.
So, I mean, again, this is a master plan, right? So this is going to provide a vision. It's not going to provide the detail of every location a bathroom would be placed on this trail. But certainly we know that it's an important facility to provide for people. The Conservancy, we own a little property on the coast in Mendocino. We've had to put in a facility because folks were using the bushes and that's not pleasant for anybody. So, it's part of running the trail. It's part of the cost of managing the trail. So we have to identify funding for ongoing maintenance, but that's all part of the master plan, figuring out who can manage what sections and which sections get built first. And as we build into, finding a funding stream for ongoing maintenance of facilities that would get built as part of the trail.
I'm going to go to Laura Cohen. Let's talk bathrooms. Laura, how has it worked throughout the state, the West, in the United States on planning for bathroom facilities?
I'm not directly involved in that, but I do know that is, obviously a very essential concern in trail planning and trail use. And we try to provide a lot of information for our trail users. And so, the kinds of things that we provide on our website, for instance, the Heritage Rail Trail in Pennsylvania, we've got their examples of restroom facilities and guidelines. This is how we do it on our trail systems here, and this is what's working. So, I think there's a lot out there. We'll look to other examples that do have, both the rural areas and some remote areas. I mean, those are the kind of guidelines and examples we want to be looking to incorporate into our planning process.
That's Laura Cohen, Rails to Trails Conservancy. Let's go to our next question. This is coming in from Heidi. Bravo. I love the idea. And I have a 100-acre vineyard alongside the trail in Sonoma County. How are you going to keep folks out of my vineyard? Karen, let's talk about that. This is a concern that's going to need to be addressed. Again, I want to stress, you see hiking trails like this throughout the country. For the most part, I will say, we are not seeing trespassing, whether it's a vineyard, an orchard, or open land. But Karen, this is something that we're going to need to be able to work through. So let's talk about it. How do you plan to reach out to landowners in the master plan process? Please, Karen.
So as part of our working with consultants, we will be developing an outreach strategy to figure out what's the best way to do the public outreach component. Is it through Zoom meetings? Is it personal meetings, group meetings? And so that's a process we'll be developing, in the coming months. In terms of how you keep people out of, for one thing, you make the trail really attractive to stay on. So people tend to like to walk where it's easiest. And so if you have a good, well-defined trail, most people are walking on the trail. And, there are other things you can do, obviously, and if there's big issues, you can look at fencing, you can look at, planting certain kinds of vegetation that'll keep people on the trail. There's different, I think, design things you can do to help keep people on the trail. But the first and foremost, it's making the trail the attractive amenity that people want to stay on.
We're getting a lot of questions about how is the state going to fund the project? So for example, Peg writes in funding for the project, question mark. Yes, Peg, and look, I know folks are coming in and out of tonight's town hall, but the funding for the master plan, that's already secured. That's $10.5 million. That $10.5 million is going to allow the Coastal Conservancy, who is essentially going to manage the master plan and the build out of some segments of the trail, to be able to move forward, to start the community engagement process, to be able to plan for the trail, look at fire safety planning, security planning, et cetera. That money's in the bank. In addition, there's $500 million that have been secured for non-motorized trails and other items to be able to combat the climate crisis. The Great Redwood Trail would absolutely qualify for funding in that account. The last piece I'll say is the state of California, the federal government, has tens of millions of dollars available for trail build out, whether it's backcountry trails or trails through urban communities. So those grants are ongoing. So let's go to Mr. Seaman. He is the Deputy Public Works Director for Humboldt County. Hank, talk to us about some of the funding streams that are already available above and beyond the $500 million to build out some of the more urban sections of the trail. Hank.
Thank you, Senator. California has been investing a lot of money, both state and federal money, in what's called the Active Transportation Program. And so our local agencies have really looked to that as an important funding source for our trail projects that involve both transportation and recreation. And part of the reason the state is investing in those projects is that it helps with reducing vehicle miles traveled and greenhouse gas emissions. So there's really multiple benefits of investing in those projects. And then periodically, the state passes bond measures that have funding for recreational trails. And, it's, as you mentioned in the beginning, it's really terrific that you brought in the Coastal Conservancy, just based on their experience helping deliver segments of the California Coastal Trail, really, puts them in a great position to apply that experience and knowledge to, build out the Great Redwood Trail as quickly as possible.
That's Hank Seaman, Deputy Public Works Director for the County of Humboldt. Let's go to our next question. This question is coming in from Keach. Keach asks, why is the abandoned North Coast Rail Line no longer used for freight and or passenger transportation? Keach, great question. So long story short, especially through the Eel River Canyon, it's some of the most geologic unstable soils in North America. And literally when the North Coast Railroad Agency was first started in the early 1900s, the first day that a train was on it, a massive landslide came down over the tracks. And back in 1989, there was another massive landslide that covered the tracks. The federal government shut down freight operations with the North Coast Railroad Agency. And in fact, there are still train cars left in the Eel River, left over from that slide back in 1989. I will just be really candid and don't take my word for it, but look at the action. You will never see a freight train going north through the Eel River Canyon. You can't make it work financially. We have talked with 5, 6 freight train operators who have poked their nose around looking at interest of starting freight again. It is literally going to take billions upon billions of dollars to rebuild that line from essentially Healdsburg all the way up to Humboldt County. And there is no way that a private freight entity has the deep pockets to be able to build it. And we have to take the coal train seriously. So the coal train wants to be able to start up this freight line. What we're worried about is, number one, they do have some deep pockets, but 2, they can tie up the Great Redwood Trail for years on end, saying that they're going to be able to get this started. Bottom line is, you will never get a damn train through the Eel River Canyon. Never. It is too unstable. And the last thing that we would want to see anyway is an 800-car coal train coming through the Eel River. And I want to remind folks, the coal train would go along the banks of the Russian and the Eel, and the Russian and the Eel are the drinking water source for over 1 million folks. So that is why you are not going to see a rail and trail up north. You will see a rail and trail alongside rail in the southern segment in Sonoma and Marin counties, because those tracks are still very much viable. All right, let's go to the next question. Great question coming in from Sherman. Karen, will cell coverage be part of the plan, such as possible new cell tower placements? I can't comment on cell towers, but what I can say is, Karen, there have already been 1 or 2 corporations that would love to be able to look at burying a high-speed broadband internet line under the trail that would then allow for broadband to make its way up the North Coast. That's something that we would evaluate, right, Karen?
I think that absolutely needs to be evaluated, and that potentially could provide a longer-term funding stream to pay for management of the trail. So I think we're going to have to, have our eyes open for opportunities where we can join those interests. In terms of cell towers, we're not there. We're starting the plan. If it's a trail system, you would like people to be able to communicate for safety purposes, obviously. But at this point, we can look at that, but that's not part of the focus of what we're doing right now.
Karen Gear with the State Coastal Conservancy. We're going to go to Larry. Larry writes in, thank you for a compelling presentation of the work done thus far for the important groundbreaking project. What is the status of the master plan? Is it partially done? So here's the status. Cities, Ukiah, Willits, Arcata to Eureka, City of Healdsburg, several segments in Marin and Sonoma counties, they're already building out trails within their jurisdiction. There's also a trail that connects Arcata with Eureka along 101. The master plan, Karen, please push back on me, will kick off in early 2022, but really get going later in the year of 2022. And it's probably going to take, and Karen, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think it's probably going to take 36 to 48 months to be able to complete. That doesn't mean cities in some county areas can continue to be built out as we do the planning, but especially in the backcountry, this plan needs to take place. Karen, I'll turn it over to you to tell me if you think I'm full of it.
No, I think that's a reasonable expectation of 36 to 48 months to complete the plan. And yes, we certainly don't want this planning effort to get in the way of trail projects that are already moving forward. So, we're excited that those local jurisdictions have been, and any of those projects that are moving into construction right now, those jurisdictions have been working on for years to get them to this point. So it's exciting that we already are seeing trails constructed, and we want those to proceed as well as alongside the master planning process that's going to be happening.
100%. All right, so let's talk about tunnels. There are several tunnels along the Great Redwood Trail that trains used to go through. On a few of those tunnels, the hill has dumped soil and rock. There's a landslide that blocks some tunnels. So Karen, let's talk about that. This master plan will probably evaluate what it's going to cost to be able to clear the tunnel versus potentially going around the tunnel or on top of the tunnel. Karen, talk to us about that, because there's a lot of options that need to be studied.
Exactly. And that's, I think, what I alluded to in the beginning when I talked about potential reroute. I mean, if there are places where it's just astronomically expensive to redo the tunnel and a reroute is feasible and makes sense, then that's, something we should pursue. And we also need to look at the tunnels that are still open to make sure that they're safe and, do a little bit more of an engineering analysis on the safety of the existing tunnels that are open. And we'll see how far we get with that in this master planning process.
There's been a couple of questions that come in, and I want to go to both Karen and Hank on this about the American with Disabilities Act. So let's talk about that. The great thing about the Great Redwood Trail is that it's flat. And what I mean by that is for the railroad, there's a 1% slope standard. And so it's relatively flat compared to a trail that you'd be hiking in Desolation Valley, for example. But Karen, Hank, obviously we'll be taking into consideration ADA access, Americans with Disability Act access on this trail. Karen first, and let's go to Hank.
Sure. And I think, there are different standards depending on what type of trail you're talking about. So I think that the trails in the more urban areas are going to be, fully ADA, American with Disability Act standards. Often those are paved trails. As you said, they're already flat, so they meet the grade issues. The backcountry trails have there's a backcountry standard. It's not, you can't make those trails fully accessible because they're in the backcountry, but you can do things to make them as accessible as possible, given that they're in the backcountry.
Hank, why don't you talk about how you have handled ADA access, please?
I agree with Karen that, one of the key goals of the master plan will try to look at how we can make the Great Redwood Trail as accessible as possible to the greatest number of people. And there's definitely engineering standards to make paved trails accessible to wheelchairs and mobility devices. And the federal government, the Access Board, has published standards for outdoor developed areas. And technically they only apply to federal land and federal agencies, but for example, Humboldt County, we've adopted that as our standard for natural surface trails. And so it means, using compacted gravel to have a firm and stable surface, to have a minimum trail width, to have passing spaces periodically, making sure there's not obstacles in the trail like roots and rocks more than 2 inches. So the good news is, the practice of building trails has advanced to the point where we can really apply good standards and practices to make trails accessible for everyone.
We're going to be going to some Facebook comments. Thank you so much, Hank Seaman from County of Humboldt. Dennis writes in, spin, spin, spin. That's what Democrats do. All right. Thank you so much, Dennis. We really appreciate the comment. Let's go to Marie. Marie says, fabulous project. She's writing it on Facebook tonight. As the project manager for the Fort Bragg Coastal Trail, I agree that these trails are game changers for local communities in terms of increasing revenues and health outcomes for visitors and locals alike. Deborah writes in on Facebook tonight, Rails to Trails has gone on for years. My blinded World War II father was promoting this before he passed away. Nora writes in tonight on Facebook, I love the trails. Sutter County put a great bike trail on a similar rail path. Coal trains, such a bad idea. Add to that to the challenge of our wildfires. No, just no to the coal train. All right, we're going to now go to Laura from the Rail to Trails Conservancy. Susie writes in, and I know you're not going to be able to comment specifically on the Great Redwood Trail, but let's talk about, Laura, how it would work with how it's worked in other trails. Again, I want to remind folks, 25,000 miles of freight rail line have been transitioned to rails since the 1980s in the United States of America. And that's what we're going to do right here. So Susie writes in, is there a plan for access points for several locations along the length of the trail so that people who don't have the time or ability to hike the entire trail can still use it? So Laura, Talk to us about entry points, trailheads, on and off trails. How does that work? I know we can't talk specifically about the Great Redwood Trail, but we're not reinventing the wheel. So tell us how it works for shorter excursions versus longer excursions.
Sure. Yeah, that's certainly something that will be dealt with in the planning process. Yeah, you don't want to have entry points so far apart that it discourages a lot of the users. As Karen was saying before, we want to make this trail as accessible to as many people as possible. So having those entry points at reasonable lengths and we're common sort of entry points for people coming from different directions, definitely an important part of the process. And, we share that kinds of information for trail users on our web platform, traillink.com, which is where we've mapped thousands of trails all over the country and provide maps and information about where's the parking, where's the restrooms, where are the drinking fountains, what kind of surface is it, what's the grade. It provides all kinds of user-friendly information, and access points are a key part of that. So we know that people are really need those access points to make it accessible to a wide range of users, and that's what we want.
Thank you so much, Laura Collins. Laura Collins with the Rails to Trails Conservancy. Hank, do you want to chime on this 30 seconds in regards to on and off points of a trail?
Yeah, I think that's a key part of the master plan process. Really a key to success is how we integrate the Great Redwood Trail with existing facilities, with parks and other public facilities that cities are already maintaining. And then I think the master plan will also identify where there's a need to think about investing in new facilities.
Hank Seaman, thank you so much for the County of Humboldt. I want to go, we have about 5 minutes left. I want to go to a rocket round of questions. So we're going to ask each of our panelists to be able to chime in quickly on these. Mateo writes in, you briefly touched on the homeless problem affecting the trail, but remain mostly vague about it. How are you planning to keep homeless people off the trail? If homeless encampments do pop up, how will they be removed? So number one, we're not going to keep anybody off the trail. So folks can traverse the trail if they want to. On the issue of homeless encampments, this is going to be part of the master plan. And Mateo, we're not at all trying to be coy, not trying to evade an issue, not trying to be vague. We're simply saying we haven't kicked off the master plan, and I promise you, Mateo, it will be looked at. And what we can do to partner with communities on the issue of encampments. Karen, I don't want to ever speak for you, but again, we're not trying to frustrate folks not having definitive answers tonight because we haven't kicked off the master plan. But what we can tell you, and this is our commitment, wildfires, trail security, the potential of wildfire cameras that can also be security cameras, all will be studied on the trail. Karen, what say you?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we're doing now is we're flagging issues that we want to make sure get addressed. And this is obviously one we know we need to address. And as we move forward in the planning process and we have, more town halls or public meetings for input, provide that we want everybody flagging these issues that are important for us to address. And we will be looking at other trail systems. We'll be talking to our local communities of, Humboldt and Eureka and Ukiah and how they handle encampment issues along trails, and seeing how we can work together to jointly support each other in our efforts to keep the trail safe and enjoyable for everybody.
Margot writes in, who is responsible for keeping the trail clean and protected? So let's talk about that for a moment. Laura is with the Rails to Trails Conservancy. Talk to us about, there will be volunteer efforts. There will be trail stewards. There will be most likely paid staff that will be working the trail. But Laura, how are trails maintained across America, ones that we transition from rail to trail? Talk to us about the model. Then I'd like to go to Hank and then to Karen.
Yeah, there's a lot of creative approaches because there are many places where you have a long distance trail that goes through, more rural areas, and it is a little more of a maintenance and management challenge. And so often that's a kind of a creative package of a county or a state agency, along with nonprofit partnerships and volunteer patrols. And, we see that in urban and rural areas. And so those partnerships, I know, for instance, I think Utah State Parks partners with a nonprofit organization to maintain their state rail trails, their long distance rail trails. So you get creative with those partnerships, and on trails like this that are so popular and are going to be a huge destination, I think you'll have a lot of people stepping up to volunteer and help support it as well. So there'll be a lot of great partnerships that form to take care of this trail.
Laura Cohen with the Rails to Trails Agency. Hank, anything you want to chime in regards to ongoing stewardship of trails?
In Humboldt County, we're really fortunate to have the Humboldt Trails Council. They sponsor a volunteer trail stewards program. Many of our trails benefit from monthly work days. I know in Mendocino County, there's the Ukiah Valley Trail Group, and in Sonoma County, there's the Redwood Trails Alliance, and they both organize volunteer trail support. So really the grassroots support and volunteer effort really helps local agencies be willing to take on new responsibilities for trail projects.
Hank Seaman, thank you so much. We're now going to go to Ryan. We're going to stay with Hank. Ryan writes in, what challenges are being faced in accruing the frontage access needed to complete the trail in Humboldt County? Hank.
One thing is that, and this gets back to the question about the rail corridor and, the spending. The reality is the railroad corridor has not been maintained for 25 years and it's deteriorating in many places. And so the vision of creating the Great Redwood Trail will convert this deteriorating infrastructure from a liability to an asset. And for example, in the Humboldt Bay Trail, we've had part of our project is making urgent repairs to the shoreline where there's erosion damage on the railroad that hasn't been repaired, that creates a threat to Highway 101 as well as the whole rail corridor. So I expect that there'll be situations like that as we look elsewhere along the rail corridor where there's a need to address drainage, damage, deterioration. And if things aren't, if improvements aren't made, that creates a threat to adjacent property and our environment. So we do need to have our eyes wide open in terms of the rail corridor and its condition, but this is really a once in a lifetime opportunity to change the purpose from a deteriorating asset, deteriorating liability into a really public benefit asset.
Thanks, Seaman with the County of Humboldt. Hey, we're taking your questions here for a couple more minutes. This is going to be last call for questions. If you'd like to be able to get last minute questions in, please email us. We're taking your questions live, senator.mcguire@senate.ca.gov, senator.mcguire@senate.ca.gov. Richard writes in, please define your term rail bank. I don't understand. Richard, great question. So rail banking means that we literally will be able to get the permission by the federal government to build the trail on top of the rail. So we have to go to the federal government to be able to secure the rights to build the trail on top of the railbed. It's the least expensive and most efficient way to be able to get the Great Redwood Trail built. So the southern end of the Great Redwood Trail from San Francisco Bay all the way up to the Mendocino-Sonoma line, mostly a asphalt trail through communities, probably dirt trail in the unincorporated. Through a lot of Mendocino and Humboldt County, we're going to rail bank it. We're going to go to the federal government, which we already have. We have an application pending, Richard, and what we're asking for is the permission to put the trail on top of the rail. Now, at any time, if a freight operator has a viable business plan, they could take the trail off of the rail. I will tell you this, out of 25,000 miles of rail that's been transitioned to trail, less than 20 miles since the 80s have ever gone back to rail. So the vast majority of trail that have been put on top of rail still exists. Laura, I assume you would say the same thing about that.
Yeah, that's right. That rail banking was created. It's a federal law created by Congress because they saw thousands of miles of corridor being abandoned, and those corridors, it's like Humpty Dumpty. Once they're broken up, you can't put them back together again. And so it was really a corridor preservation strategy that with a lot of rail lines just not financially feasible anymore. Rail banking is a voluntary agreement between a railroad company and a trail agency to use an out-of-service corridor, and with the option of returning rail to that corridor. That almost never happens just because of the economies of rail versus other transportation options. So it's generally, just a very good strategy for preserving the corridor and recycling that corridor into a new use for biking and hiking and everything else that we enjoy on trails.
Next question comes in from Robin. We have just a couple more questions. Robin asks, why has SMART not built out the trails next to the rail line as they have promised? Look, Robin, it is voter mandate. We agree that SMART needs to have the financial plan to be able to build trail along the rail. And candidly, the Great Redwood Trail is going to help this with a coordinated Northern California vision for the Great Redwood Trail. I think we're going to be able to assist SMART on securing additional funding to be able to build out additional segments of the trail that they have promised voters. And I know that this is going to be a priority for the board, working with, for example, the Marin Bicycle Coalition, the Sonoma County Bicycle Coalition, to be able to get this done. But I firmly believe we got to follow through with what was promised to voters and to be able to get that trail built out with the rail as SMART moves north. So great question. Thank you so much. Several questions about e-bikes. I want to go to Laura on this. So e-bikes, we all know what they are. They're bikes with a little electronic motor on them. E-bikes are borderline motorbikes. And on the current coastal trail in Fort Bragg, there are no restrictions or guidelines for e-bikes. Okay, Karen, I think I know what you're going to say, but how do you feel about e-bikes? And is the master plan going to look at the use of e-bikes on the Great Redwood Trail?
I would say that I expect the master plan would look at, in terms of, we're looking at what user groups, use which parts of the trail. So e-bikes are one user group, and they will be looked at, as will equestrians and dog walkers and joggers and other folks who want to use the trail. I don't think I have a personal opinion about e-bikes, if that's what you were asking.
No. Just making sure that it's going to be used. But we have heard Karen say, bring on the dogs on the trail. And I'll be honest, y'all, I think dogs, look, I'm just being candid. And when I was on the Board of Supervisors in Sonoma County, even if you say no to dogs, people are going to bring their dogs. So I think that we need to be able to really look at that intently. And we may need to be able to look at, for example, leash laws and et cetera on the trail. But that's something to be determined. And I don't want to get out in front of it. Okay, a lot of questions tonight, you all, about getting involved. So I want to start with Karen. Drew says, how can a member of the general public help make this a reality? Karen, the Coastal Conservancy, you're ramping up. You have the money to be able to hire staff. So talk to us about your plan to involve the public. Then I want to go to Hank to talk about how folks in the north can get involved. Karen Gear.
Sure. Well, the first thing you can do is get involved in the master planning process and let your opinions be heard about what you want this trail to be and how you want it to look and how you want to be able to use it and how you want to help in the future. Where do you want to be a trail steward? Can you can you help with your local community in terms of managing a section of trail, adopting a section of trail? So I think there will be, more and more opportunities as the planning process goes on for people to be involved. And then as we get into actually constructing trails, there's absolutely going to be opportunities for helping to maintain them.
Thank you so much, Karen. Hank, talk about how folks can get involved up north in regards to the trail.
In Humboldt County, the Humboldt Trails Council is really the clearinghouse and the voice for trail information and trail updates. And on their website, people can sign up to get periodic newsletters and emails with trail information, and they're closely following the Great Redwood Trail. And then I believe, the Ukiah Valley Trail Group in Mendocino and Redwood Trails Alliance in Sonoma also serve a similar function. And I expect as the master plan process gets rolled out that other community organizations will coalesce and activate in order to help channel community input. So I do expect that there'll be, as this Conservancy process starts, that local groups will start to really organize and get actively involved.
April writes in, Karen, I sent in a question regarding wildlife needs. Is there a biologist working alongside to ensure, for example, water access is not accidentally cut off to wildlife? Again, I just want to stress, if we're looking at the vast majority of this trail, when it comes north of Mendocino County, it's rural, it's rugged, and it's backcountry. So there will not be any fences, et cetera, for wildlife. But Karen, I think in the northern portion, that's not going to be an issue. Karen, take it away.
Yeah, I think, for the greatest length possible, the trail is going to be on the rail bed, right? So that shouldn't be having those kinds of impacts. Obviously when you're crossing water crossings, there are a number, and the Eel River Canyon has many bridges or culverts. So you'll need to, those will need to be looked at and carefully designed. But in terms of any project that eventually moves forward into the construction phase, you absolutely have to look at all those issues, because you're going to need to get your permits and your CEQA done on trail segments. And so certainly those sorts of issues will be looked at.
So ladies and gentlemen, we're going to have to start winding down. It's about 8 o'clock. We've been with you for an hour and a half. And I want to say thank you. So many of you, I'm just looking right now. We peaked at about 2,600. We're still at about 1,400 strong here tonight after an hour and a half. I want to say thank you. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We're going to need to be able to look at closing comments from each of our panelists. But before we do, here's where we stand. And I want to remind folks what the next steps are. Come March of 2022, the North Coast Railroad Agency no longer will exist. It's going to turn into the Great Redwood Trail Agency. That is a public board that has appointed members of local elected officials from Marin, Sonoma, Mendocino, and Humboldt counties. As of July of 2022, the Coastal Conservancy will take over the master plan management, working with the board, as well as looking at some initial segment construction. So 2022 is going to be a banner year for the Great Redwood Trail. The master plan is completely funded. There's money in the bank for the Great Redwood Trail to be able to apply for and to start looking at additional trail construction, especially in those more incorporated areas through cities and in and around communities. As far as the backcountry portions of these trails, of the Great Redwood Trail, I would not anticipate significant construction with the exception of Lone Pine Ranch. There is a real possibility that we could see the first 12 miles of the Great Redwood Trail built in the next 24 to 36 months in the Eel River Canyon along the Eel River there at Lone Pine Ranch, working in conjunction with the Wildlands Conservancy. A lot to do, a lot of work ahead. We're not going to do this fast. We're going to do it right. That's our promise. That's been our promise, and we're going to continue to follow through on that. I'd like to be able to go to closing comments. 30 seconds, please. Let's start with Laura Cohen. For the next year ahead, your thoughts on the Great Redwood Trail, and how do you want to leave tonight?
You know, it's just so exciting to see this big vision that at times seemed daunting and a long way off, really coming to reality, and the actual planning process moving forward, and so many people demonstrating their interest and enthusiasm for it. I just feel like there's a ton of momentum. I can kind of start to see it and feel it. So we're really excited, and we will, continue to support this by sharing, what are the best ideas that can help us make this the best, not only the longest rail trail, but the best rail trail in the country. And I'm so excited that as a Californian, it's going to be right here in my state. So really excited to work with all of you on it.
Laura Cohen from the Rails and Trails Conservancy, thank you so much. Let's go to Hank Seaman with the County of Humboldt.
It's really amazing just how far we've come in the last 3 or 4 years, and just this new era of trail planning, and how it integrates with the railroad. We've been working on some of the more challenging projects, around Humboldt Bay, and it's really exciting to think about accelerating the pace of delivering trail segments, connecting communities, connecting people to the Bay and our resources. So it is going to take time to transition into the master plan, but just the vision and the details that plan will reflect will give us a great roadmap.
Hank Seaman, County of Humboldt, thank you so much. Let's go to the point. The manager for this project, on behalf of the Coastal Conservancy, I want to say thank you to Karen Gear for joining us tonight. Karen, your closing comments, please.
Well, I just want to say we are really excited to work on this trail project. And as a veteran of many decades now working on the coastal trail, the ability to get the trail right of way in one fell swoop is just huge. And to think that this trail can actually get built in the coming decades is really exciting. So we really appreciate your leadership on this, Senator McGuire. This would not be happening without your efforts. We're looking forward to getting working on it and staffing up for it in the new year. And looking forward to many fun public meetings to talk through these issues and figure out solutions that we can all be happy with.
Karen Gear with the Coastal Conservancy. Thank you so much, Karen. I also want to say a special thank you to Jason Lyles. Jason Lyles has been with us from the very beginning on this project. He has been point for our office on the Great Redwood Trail. And I just want to be blunt. We would not be here without his tenacity and his hard work. And I just want to say thank you so much, Lyles, for everything you've been doing. I want to say thank you to Carrie Lindecker and Carlene Rebish and Abby Robbins for all the work that they've done behind the scenes tonight. Rich has been our director here tonight. Thank you so much, Rich, as always. And I want to end it right here with this. We're really not trying to be coy with you tonight about some specific questions that kind of came in on the Great Redwood Trail Master Plan, because we haven't kicked off the master plan yet. Here's what you can expect in the master plan. Number one, the master plan is going to cover and determine trail construction and alignment, operational costs, what type of material will be used on the segments, what the timeline for build out of segments could be. We'll be focusing on governments and environmental, along with wildfire prevention, security measures, and of course, focusing on homelessness. The master plan will take about 36 to 48 months. You're going to hear me say this many times. We're committed to doing this right, not fast. And I understand that, again, folks want to be able to see this built yesterday, but we got a lot of outreach in front of us. We have to sit down and meet with landowners in both urban, suburban, and rural stretches of this trail. We're going to need to be able to sit down with city leaders, nonprofit leaders, and of course, business leaders in each of the communities that this trail will be traversing through. You have our commitment. Over the next 36 to 48 months, you're going to be very familiar with the master plan. You're going to be very familiar of Karen Gear. She's going to be putting a lot of miles on her car along with her team to be able to have in-person and virtual meetings, one-on-one as well as group. And we look forward to working with you. Our 100% promise is this. We're going to work with the community and we're going to get this done. And this is going to be your trail for generations to come. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We wish you a happy Hanukkah, a Merry Christmas, a wonderful holiday season, and let's get this damn thing built and let's defeat the coal train in 2022. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll get this master plan kicked off in early 2022. Have a great night, everybody. Stay strong, North Coast. Thank you.